Welcome back to Martins and More. My name's Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
And this episode's brought to you by our Patreon members. Join our growing community for early access to every episode, exclusive video versions of the podcast, behind-the-scenes footage, full-length product demos, and more. We appreciate you. We appreciate you, Spoon, for joining us today. What's going on with you?
Well, as you see, my singing voice is coming back after the first or most severe bout of laryngitis I've ever had. So that's exciting. Looking forward to spring continuing and starting to get the guitars into the park and all that sort of thing. Looking forward to, I'm going to be embarking on testing a variety of strings coming up. And in fact, that's has a lot to do with this show, as I was inspired to start testing strings because of the strings that I have on my guitar at the moment.
Oh, do tell. What are you talking about?
What do you mean, what am I talking about? You know what I'm talking about, because you've been trying out these strings even longer. Today, on this episode of Martins and More, we are going to be discussing the Kovar, trademark Kovar strings that CF Martin and Company have put out under their Luxe by Martin brand. Luxe, Luxe by Martin. These are their Kovar strings.
That's right. And I'm not sure how often you go to parties, but are you always late to it? Because I think we're very, very late to this party. We're taping this show in late April. That's how late I am. And I can honestly say at least the last 2 or 3 months, I've seen a lot of forum footage, a lot of Facebook chatter. We are not the first people to take a look at these strings. I fear we might be the last. Before we actually talked about doing this in a formal capacity, did you have any kind of temptation to try them yourself on your own guitars just for recreation?
I certainly did, and they came out at Winter NAMM in January, and I got to hear them on multiple guitars at the factory of various sizes, various woods, and so that's, was informative. And then they gave me some sets of these strings. But because of certain issues that I was going through, where I actually couldn't play for a while, and I had to put it off. And then I had a show in March, the annual St. Patrick's Day gig. I intended to put them on then, but I just got too busy and it just didn't happen. So I am late, very late. I'm later than you are in terms of this, but I wanted to be able to experience them in over time and see how they perform, because one of the big selling points about this is that these strings are longevity strings. They're being sold as strings that will last longer than traditional strings without the need of treating the strings or coating the strings or any of that. It's all done through the special alloy that was created. So these are steel strings with steel wrappings. Well, it's not steel wrappings, metal wrappings, but they're not treated. They're not dipped in anything. They're not covered in anything. You're not going to have little tendrils slowly peeling off of them like old paint or, any of that stuff. So I was very, very excited, when I first heard these were on the way. And I'm sorry I didn't get to this sooner, but I'm happy that I'm doing it now.
Yeah, and it's I probably should have listened a little bit more closely, but I was at the factory last week, and if you guys, we haven't posted it yet, but by the time you hear this episode, you should have also heard an episode prior where I got to meet my good friend Bobby Madero at the factory, and he took delivery of a beautiful custom shop Martin. He was talking to our friend Tim Teal about which string should I go with, and his first idea was, I'm going to get this brand new Martin. I'm going to ask the director of instrument design, which string should I put on this? And very quickly, they had a conversation about these new Kovar strings. And I really should have reached out to Tim earlier this morning to make sure I don't paraphrase this the wrong way. But he was describing the Kovar Luxe strings as they are the most phosphor bronze-ish, non-phosphor bronze string they have right now. So if you like the sound of phosphor bronze and you want to experiment with the nickel and the monel, this is actually in that direction without being phosphor bronze itself. And he, of course, said the same things you just did. They're going to last a lot longer without being coated. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. And I was able to put these on my guitar long enough that I got, we'll talk about impressions, and I want to ask you if it makes sense how we should actually structure this episode. Should we talk in pieces about what we thought initially, what about the feel, compared to our favorites? But I am very curious whether or not we're recording this for someone else or just you and I talking. This is a subject we would certainly, throw around even if we weren't putting an episode together. So it should be pretty cool.
Well, I think there's an awful lot of people who listen to this program, this podcast, and others, and are members of the Unofficial Martin Guitar Forum or longtime Martin aficionados. And whether because of their age or otherwise, anything new is automatically bad. And that, classic, whatever it is, I'm again it, if it's new sort of attitude. And I must confess that I am guilty of that in various ways. I've always said, even when I was younger, some people will say, I think of how Vonnegut, I'm thinking of Dickens in, I think, Bleak House. He refers to a family that had no children, no babies. They had a lot of little old men and women, but they never had any actual children. and a lot of people have accused me of being, an old grump since I was quite small. But I've always been resistant to change at first. I love change after it happens. I often will embrace change once it happens, but the anticipation of change, I'm often pessimistic about it. And that was true with these strings. And I know I'm not alone. I mean, I know there are people out there speaking to people within the factory that they could tell people were not going to like them before they heard them. And sure enough, as soon as they heard them, they didn't like them. But that's because they're different. And it's almost like coming from rosewood. You've been playing rosewood a lot, and you go play a maple guitar or a mahogany guitar, and you don't like it because it's different. But then you play it for a while, and then your ears start hearing what's there, not what you're not missing what you're used to. And that certainly happened to me with these strings. And so I have to say, it took me less than an hour the first time I put them on a guitar to go from these are different than what I normally play, which I normally play 80/20s silked Martin Marquis that have the silk wrappings that I feel actually do affect the sound. And so these are not those. And so at first, I was hearing I wasn't hearing what I was used to. And then I started focusing on what I was hearing. And to drop another literary name like Hamlet about my brain, and it completely turned around. And I was like, wow, I really like these a lot. So that's all I'm going to say about that for right now.
Yeah, I'm finding it hard to really talk about these without giving the ending away. And what I would normally do if we turn these microphones off, I would make this a 10-minute episode. Give me the bullet points and let's get to would you recommend them or not. But I put a little note together here. Let me know if this makes any sense. God forbid we talk about this before a show starts, but I know we're both very busy. I sort of want to talk about the initial tone when they're brand new, the way they feel / tension, their tone after they break in, and we can have a long conversation about when is that. The tone after a whole month, you can't join in on that just exactly yet, but I'm going to at least consider saying my piece and then giving you guys an update later. And then value, because the point you bring up, these are going to last longer without being coated. I certainly can admit I went into trying these strings really based on they're brand new and I really should be checking them out. But even more importantly, I wanted to see if I could get more life out of a set of strings without going to a coated. And then there's the coated versus treated. Let me sort of shoehorn that in too. Years and years ago, when Elixir was the first thing on the scene, at least as far as I knew, they were a coated string where it was actually a guitar string, and they coated. Some of them, I think, were dipped in some yuck, and then later they were sprayed and all that thing. But
that's a rather judgmental word, yuck.
Well, they're
they were dipped in a solution that was supposed to prevent corrosion and basically completely eliminate string noise. And I still know people, lots of people, professional people who live by elixirs, play elixirs, record albums with elixirs, and like them just fine. So it is but it's a very polarizing concept, polarizing brand. Even Elixir themselves, as you said a long time ago, they came out. They've adjusted them a lot. They have a variety of strings, including nano webs and things that have very little coating compared to the other things. And then even the more modern, I think they also went the modern route of they're not just dipping a completed wound string. They're treating or dipping or coating the material that then goes on, goes around the core, or however you want to put it, and which is what Martin's treated strings are. That's why they call them treated and not coated, and their lifespan strings. But there's a variety of different brands out there that offer strings that have been manipulated one way or another to extend their playing life. So, which can be more important for some people than others. Everything from body chemistry to how often you play, to just personal taste in what sound you like. I know Martin is looking forward to these as a game changer, and maybe they will be, because these are not coated, these are not treated. Even psychologically, that's going to appeal to certain people. But what they did is they made strings out of metallic alloy that is corrosion, I won't say proof, but resistant. And that is supposed to extend the life of the strings and keep them sounding, if not new, fresh and vibrant and all that. So I'll just end that little piece by saying I did enjoy the video that other people haven't seen of you playing these strings over time, and I thought that was very informative.
Oh, thank you. And I want to begin this actually by asking you a two-part question. Are you a fan of monels and the whole idea of nickel strings? And if your answer is yes, would you agree that that's going to influence how you perceived your preconceived notions of these new strings and how you actually judge them when you played them?
Well, monel strings they come on various Martin models, including the 15 series with the mahogany tops. And I think they're on the 17s as well. They are a nickel-based alloy. And they were originally developed, as I understand it, for magnetic sound hole pickups as a way to resist the way that certain strings would be much louder because of the magnetic field and all that. People kind of forgot about that. Some people just liked them because they liked the sound of them. But they were very difficult to produce, and they kind of went extinct. And then somebody figured out how to create them without going through too many hoops. And Martin came out with their retro strings, as they call them, and they're supposed to sound like, to some people's ears, normal strings that have been played in to the point that they're really mellow sounding. So they don't have the vibrancy of brand new strings. And I would say, to some extent, that's an accurate portrayal of them. I've liked them on mahogany guitars more than rosewood guitars, and I used to play them fairly regularly on my what's now my only mahogany guitar, which is a 1995 00C16. And so that was essentially the closest thing to an OM18 Martin had made since the 30s, but it had the skinny 1/11/16 inch neck, so they decided to call it a 000. It also has a 22 fret neck because it was designed to appeal to electric guitarists because of the brand that was Martin's first cutaway and all that. Anyway, that I played monels on those, the retro strings on there for quite a while. A good example of how you can have preconceptions about these strings. Lawrence Juber has had a endorsement deal with Martin for strings for some years with his special weights that are designed for dadgad. Essentially, you have a medium gauge string on the 2 E strings and the B string and the A, D, and E are light gauge strings. But they are retro monels. And go check out his mini performance videos. And would you know those were not normal strings when you hear him playing? I doubt it. So sometimes when you're really focusing on something, they seem much more exotic or unusual. So that's a very long answer of yes, but I never really liked them on rosewood guitars nearly as much as on mahogany guitars. And again, I've always been an 80-20 man. I've never been a big fan of phosphor bronze, and we'll get into that later on. And Tim's claim that these new strings sound like phosphor bronze.
Yeah, he was basically telling Bobby they're the most similar to phosphor bronze that we have in a string that's really not phosphor bronze. And I'm going to answer my own question by saying that I tried monels on my own guitar only 1 or 2 times, and I really wasn't a fan. I didn't even really like them a lot brand new. That said, being here in a music store and testing guitars when they come in, it's my literal job to make sure when we bring a guitar back from Martin that I make sure it plays properly and there's nothing wrong with it. I rarely get to sit down with a guitar more than 5 minutes at a time. Once I've figured that much out, I don't want to, make anybody sad, but I don't get to play 10 extra minutes for joy. I just have to put that down and get to the next guitar or get to the next YouTube video or the next delivery. But I've actually played a lot of them on, like you're saying, on 17 series, on 15 series, and I didn't dislike them. What I really wish I would have done more often in my career here was take an opportunity and take, retro monels off of 15 series, put phosphor bronze on there, play that enough, maybe even record it. And before we're totally out of inventory, I probably should take time and do that at least in one case-by-case basis. So I'm coming at this new pack of Luxe by Martin Kovar strings, not being a big fan of non-phosphor bronze strings. I don't necessarily mind treated strings. I do play a lot of the MA 540Ts, which is a treated version of phosphor bronze, but I'm going to give you my opinions of the new Kovar strings, and you need to know, as a reference point, I don't have a long history of loving the nickel sound, so that's where I'm coming from. Spoon's coming from a similar area. I only tested it on my Rosewood OM28V. Spoon, you mentioned before you tested this on both a mahogany guitar and a rosewood guitar. Which rosewood guitar is wearing these
correct.
strings?
My custom, my Spoon Phillips model that you guys used to sell, which is Guatemalan rosewood and Adirondack spruce. So we started talking about monels, which was a nickel based alloy. The Kovar strings are a nickel based alloy too, but it's Kovar. The Kovar is nickel and cobalt, and this is most unusual. And they look similar to the retro strings, and that they're basically like silver, grayish silver. I think they might actually be a little lighter, more silver colored than the gray that you get out of the retro strings. I will say I think the retro strings are used on, Martin will stock them on guitars from the 17 series, guitars that people might think sounded overly bright or brittle from with traditional strings, and that the idea was to kind of mellow off that high-end sizzle, as it were, from the 17 series instruments. So I thought it was interesting. They also put them on the 15s, which don't have high-end sizzle. If anything, they're even, they're very mellow sounding right from the start. So, interesting that they put them on both the 17s and the 15s. But the Kovar strings, I don't think sound very much like the retro strings. I think they look more like the retro strings than they sound like the retro strings. Now, I haven't used the retro strings in a while, and I may at some point in the coming weeks put a set on, and because I still have some, just to see if remind myself what they sound like. I do think it's fascinating that I am an 80-20s man. I like 80-20s. You're a phosphor bronze man. I used to play phosphor bronze before I started playing Martins. I think phosphor bronze, for me personally, phosphor bronze strings add sound and tonality to a guitar. And I think they're really good for making inexpensive guitars or cheap guitars or not very good guitars sound a lot better because they add a lot of pizzazz, a lot of sonic coloring. And like I use the word sizzle, I really hear a lot of sizzle when they're brand new particularly. I kind of see that as sort of sonic glare that makes it more about the sound of the strings. And I think 80-20s, which some people say are too bright, I think they're bright right at first, but that brightness drops off after about a week. And then I feel like they're more transparent, and I feel like I'm hearing the guitar and I'm hearing the wood without the extra. It's almost like when you're talking about equalizers or other special effects you can add in recording. I feel like I'm hearing the guitar without that extra special effect that you get from phosphor bronze. And so I think it's interesting I guess neutral is, well, yeah, I feel like I hear the guitar more than the string, and I feel with phosphor bronze, I think phosphor bronze makes a lot of guitars sound similar because I'm hearing so much of the string tonality. And but I certainly understand why people like them. They're clearly the most popular string for steel string acoustic guitar players out there. So it's interesting that we are from two different camps when it comes to the kind of strings that we prefer to play.
And I don't want to open up a can of worms, and it's not fair for me to ask you to answer for Martin, but I'll say it anyway. Are you surprised Martin actually debuted the GPCE Inception Maple with Kovar strings?
No, for a couple of reasons, but I just want to add to what I just said earlier is I don't like all 80-20 strings. I play the Martin Marquis silk strings because I believe the silk wrappings that are really just designed to protect the bridge pin holes in the bridge plate. I think they actually do filter out some of the high-end frequency off of the brand new, very, very bright sounding 80-20s. So I like them much more than the regular 80-20s, even though they're the exact same string. But I'm not surprised for multiple reasons. One, Martin has a long history since Chris Martin took over of introducing new things on special models. This goes all the way back to the first use of Sapele was on the CEO 5. And it's kind of that sense of, would we put this feature, this material, this new thing on this super cool, very special Martin that we're debuting if it didn't deserve to be on it? And I think that's part of their psychological marketing approach. But on that guitar particularly, it is a very, by Martin standards, light, airy sound. It is maple and walnut, and it is not a typical Martin sound. And so when I first picked up the guitar, I thought it had the retro strings on it. And I thought, oh, I see, they want to warm up the sound of this maple guitar. And then I played it and realized these don't sound like retros. These are the new Kovar strings. And I'm still going to save my opinion about my detailed analysis of what they sound like until later. But I thought actually it was an interesting choice. But it wasn't the only new guitars that came out at NAMM that had those strings on it. I can't remember which ones did and which ones did not now. But I think the SC28s and SC18, did they have them? I don't remember now.
Think so, but I'd be so afraid to bet.
I think so too. I should have thought to look that up. I certainly have it in my notes somewhere and my reviews and stuff. But I don't know
that the X series did.
What's that?
Did they? I don't know that all the X series, the remastered X series,
I don't think they
have
did.
retros.
I don't think they did because I think price point wise, I don't think they would
Okay.
put them on guitars from the X series, but they might have put them on the SCs. I don't remember, and possibly for the same reason, to say, here are our new strings. Here's our new guitar with the new strings. Don't they sound great? And so, I'm looking forward to seeing public reaction to them now that they've been out for a while and see what people say about them, the people that have tried them and didn't like them going back to their normal string, why, all that sort of thing. And I made a point of not paying attention to that yet because I'm going to be doing some research for it. I'll definitely write up a review of these, even though it's late for One Man's Guitar. So I'm looking forward to doing more research about the public response to these guitars.
Is that One Man's with a Z by chance?
That's One Man's with a Z. So you played yours on your well-seasoned Indian Rosewood Sitka Spruce guitar. And what was your initial impressions like when your first session of playing these strings?
Let's do that. Let's follow some form here, and I'm going to say this first section will be called Initial Tone When Brand New. And I will say that when I put these on my guitar, I was taking off a set of phosphor bronze MA540Ts. So what's become my go-to string, not that I swear by them or won't go away from them, but I don't dislike them, and if I don't really put my mind to trying new things, I'll just restring my guitar and I'll just know that I'll like that. And that's what I go to, MA540T. So I took those off and I put a set of the Luxe by Martin Kovar strings, and for the record, they were lights, they were 12s. My first reaction was they sounded almost as bright as the MA540s with an EQ curve of maybe the mid-range. Instead of a mid-range scoop, there was actually what I would call a squawk. And I wouldn't say that it was like a wah-wah pedal halfway down. It isn't that really nasal, ugly mid-range boost that can get almost dissatisfying or nasal. But there was an increase, especially when you say mid-range, you can say there's bass, there's mids, and there's treble. But what I like to do is I'd say there's bass, low mid-range, high mid-range, treble. So the full frequency spectrum of your guitar divided into four. I'm not talking about the bass. I'm not talking about the trebles. I'm talking about the higher parts of the mid-range. In that specific part of the voice, it was very pronounced, very, very fast attack. And if I would play across the strings, it would almost sound like somebody took an equalizer and raised the upper mid-range quite a bit. And my initial honest opinion was, I don't know. And after less than 5 minutes, that became comfortable to my ears. And when I say this whole thing, I'm speaking about an acoustic observation. This wasn't plugged in at all. This was here in the store hours before I went to a gig. I thought that immediately became the part of a guitar sound that helps you get heard. It's the part that cuts through a mix. It's the part that sounds like it's intelligible. There's detail there. All the things that would sort of, if I would play that guitar with those strings in the same room as you, Spoon, playing a regular set of strings, especially not brand new, if we had the same volume, I would be heard more because of that part of the detail in the voice. I took that to a gig, and a similar thing happened. I plugged it in. The first 2 or 3 songs, I thought, oh man, this is too much now. What I'm used to in my own guitar, the way that the bass interacts with the mid-range and the treble, this just sounds like somebody took the mid-range and now they really turned it up, because I'm literally turning up my guitar through speakers. And that took the same amount of time. After 20 minutes, I recognized what it was doing and I got to like it. And so my first day impressions would be that I was almost unhappy with the mid-range. I quickly got used to it. My ears quickly got used to it. And I counted that as a plus. And that's across all 6 strings. So all the wound strings sounded okay. The treble sounded fine. It really, in danger of being cliche, it sounded like retros or a duller string with a mid-range boost that somewhere between retros and phosphor bronze. And I don't know if that's the way they're going to market it, but it didn't sound like phosphor bronze strings top to bottom. but it had something similar from the mid-range or from the phosphor bronze strings about them, most especially in the mid-range. And after I got used to it, I really did like the way that the clarity part of the voice in the mid-range really seemed to jump out, and it just leaps out of the sound hole. That's my first impression, coming from my favorites being phosphor bronze.
Well, Skip, that's ridiculous. Nobody could have that opinion if they really actually played those strings. No, sorry, that's a really bad Shannon Sharp
Shannon,
impersonation.
not while I'm drinking. That's before the show, man. I'm gonna watch when you take a sip now too.
Well, interesting, because I've often used what you call the 4-band equalizer sort of analogy when it comes to reviewing guitar's tone, and I think of it as bass, low mids, mid-range, and treble. And then I even go, then you have the upper high harmonics over, even higher up above the treble. And so that's really kind of a five-bander. But that's fascinating to me. Okay, so I put them on my very well broken in 1990s mahogany and Sitka spruce guitar. Scallop braced. Again, it was built basically identical to an OM, long scale, and even though they call it a triple O. And first impressions were pretty much what you just said. I noticed that they seemed a little brasher and a little, I won't say brighter necessarily, but they sounded more like phosphor bronze strings than the 8020s that I was used to and was taking off. And the 8020s I was taking off had been on there for a while. I'm one of the people who actually likes the fact that strings have a lifespan and that they change over time and mellow out. And though I definitely think there's a sweet spot for me with the 8020. If I'm playing a lot, if I was playing these days as much as you play now, I would say that the new string sound is gone by day 3 to 5. The real sweet spot is between day 5 and 10. And then they start to change and lose some vibrancy and some definition as time goes by. But I have no problem playing my strings for a month or two before I feel like they're really going. And then, of course, I'm always wide-eyed at the sound of brand new strings, so I keep them on that for that long. But and I think mahogany guitars will always sound better. And I think anything other than rosewood will sound better with old strings than rosewood does. I think rosewood is such a thick sound with such deep shadows in the undertone and all that stuff, that you really lose a lot of definition and a lot of detail with rosewood guitars that have old strings on them. And I don't think mahogany suffers from that. So I put them on my mahogany guitar, and about 5 minutes in, I was like, oh, wait a second. Yeah, this is interesting. Oh, and then my ears adjusted, and Hamlet's brain turned about, and by the end of that first session, it was like I was genuinely surprised at a phenomenal three-dimensional aspect to the voice of that guitar. In the detail, there was so much detail across those the wound strings, the D and the the D and the E string, and when you go up the neck, even in the A and the bass string, and less so the big bottom E string, but so much colorful detail, and they made the 8020s on like one of my other guitars seem really plain and really just kind of plain Jane by comparison. And like I can see somebody saying that about phosphor bronze versus 8020s in general. And I normally like that plain, that very honest, transparent sound. But unlike the Warner Brothers dancing, singing frog that I hear in phosphor bronze strings, hello, my baby, hey, look at me, listen to me. I didn't get that from these strings at all. What I got was something subtler than that, and But I still, when I play them, I still hear it, and I still feel like I'm hearing things about my guitar that I may have never heard before, in terms of how very subtle complexity when you're playing chords, when you're building up picking patterns, just detail and very focused and I won't say complexity because I think that sounds too much like you're looking at a coral reef full of all kinds of fish and all that stuff. It wasn't that distracting and it wasn't that mystifying. It was just a lot of really good detail in the sound that was always there, but sharper focused and sharp made sound like a negative term. So just refined focus and refined detail. I was genuinely impressed, and much more so than I expected to be, much more so than I would have ever heard from the retro strings. So again, I think they look more like retros than they sound. But I do understand what your comment about between retros and phosphor bronze, and I think Tim has even said that in private at one time or another. And to me, and that means something else to me that since I've been going on for so long, I'm going to shut up right now, but I'm going to bring that in a little bit about how I think they sound different from traditional phosphor bronze strings. So that was first impressions.
I know you don't want to talk too much in one spot, but I do have to ask you, did you test these plugged in at all?
Only at the factory, and just very briefly. And I wasn't doing it for the strings. I was doing it just because that happened to be what was on the guitars. But that's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. Well, I probably did play them plugged in, but again, I wasn't doing it for that reason. So I wasn't saying, hey, these are those strings. What do they sound like plugged in? So I'll have to do that. And I have very little to plug into anymore these days. I just have a very old Trace Elliott, I guess it's a 35-watt acoustic guitar amp, but I will certainly do that. I'm glad you brought that up.
I can share an experience there. I have a habit, if I'm not careful, when Tim and I play, and the mix is typically my acoustic guitar with a Trance Audio Amulet M.
That's not Tim Teal, by the way. That's not Tim Teal, by the way.
Sorry, Tim Perry. Yeah, Tim Teal won't be in a band with me. I've asked him a lot of times. He said get lost, but Tim Perry, my bandmate, plays a Rosewood Sitka Triple O, the Triple O C16 RGTE Aura. And years ago, when he heard my Trance Audio Amulet, he asked me to put one in his guitar too. So when we play a duo show, the times he's not playing a lap steel through an amp, we're both playing the same kinds of guitars. And if I'm not careful, I'll dial my guitar sound in first, and I'll think it sounds nice and warm and round, and there's lots of room in the mid-range to sing over. And then he'll plug in, and I'll remember that I have to be careful and take my preamp, and something I've only really started doing in the last couple of years, I'll be careful to add a little bit of upper mid-range so that when I'm playing single notes, I'm not lost in the mix. Because my idea of a good acoustic sound, if I'm not being proactive about it, doesn't have a lot of mid-range information. It's just really warm. And I've watched some old videos of friends of ours in the audience that would show us on Facebook, and my guitar sort of goes away. So if I'm thinking about it, I will add a little bit of definition with an EQ. And I literally mean just right around 1K or 2K. And I just take the control from 0 to 1. I don't go crazy. When I first played my OM28V that I was talking to you guys about a few minutes ago at my first gig, it was a solo gig, and all the impressions I gave you was from that point of view. The next week, or maybe 10 days later, I played the second gig, but it was with Tim, and I recognized these retro strings did all of that for me. All of the caution I have to normally take when I'm playing phosphor bronze strings to be careful with my EQ, I could be careless with EQ because these strings gave that upper mid-range push, and I loved it. I felt like I could play a little bit lighter, and everything I was doing with my right hand, I got more mileage out of it. I didn't have to struggle nearly as much or at all to be heard clearly in a 2 acoustic guitar loud mix. So the thing, I don't want to go too far and talk about the second test yet, but playing with another guitar player in the mix, and I can't really say that we did anything where I compared my guitar to his, unamplified. We don't do that at sitting at a gig before we plug in. We don't just sit there and play. I should have done that too, but I do recognize that this gave me a benefit, and I'll save some more details till the end of the podcast, but that was a very big benefit and a plus that I don't typically hear in phosphor bronze, and I'm probably sure I don't hear them in retros. Sorry, folks, this is such a great conversation. We can't put it into one episode. I think it's smart we take a break here and bring you part 2 next week. Would that be okay with you, Spoon?
Absolutely, because we have more to say.